Hi, I'm Kimberly, content author for SAT, PSAT, and ACT here at UWorld, and we're back with Janani 𝗀𝗃𝗃 to answer some more of your questions about test anxiety. Could you suggest any coping strategies for getting rid of anxiety during a test?
Yes, absolutely. This is the key thing for anyone who's experienced debilitating test anxiety and they want to get a handle of their stress. There is an evidence-based, scientifically sound method. I've kind of summarized it as the 3 R's. So the first R is recognize, and what that means is sort of recognizing your personal stress fingerprint. Everybody reacts to stress slightly differently, although there are common themes. For some, it's the racing heart, it's the sweaty palms, the churning in the stomach, headaches, the pressure in your throat. Become intimately familiar with the physical fingerprint of your stress response, and also the emotional. For some people, it's that pit of dread in their stomach, or they start to get tons of negative thoughts. They start to become oversensitive to every visual cue in the room, the bright lights, the heat. Recognize that, write it down. So next time you start to feel those sensations, you can recognize that as your personal stress fingerprint. And then it's not like some alien sensation that's taken over you when you enter the test prep room. Right. You can immediately label that and categorize it as, I am undergoing this, my typical stress response. So that's a key first step, because recognizing a problem is always the first step to solving it. Yes. And so step number 2 gets at that. Regroup is to assess that situation, to take a step back. The more you can distance yourself from that thought of stress, the greater a chance you will have of moving forward and using it to your benefit. So what that means is often, whether it's taking a deep breath or having a sort of having a sense of, okay, I recognize that I'm under stress right now, but I'm not going to get into that thought spiral. And forcing yourself almost to stop thinking of all the negative potential worst case scenarios that can happen. Because remember, yes, worst case scenarios can happen, but so can best case scenarios, and that's where your mind control comes into play. Whether it's taking a deep breath or having a positive thought that counteracts the negative, this is the key. And then the last step is also very important, and that's refocusing. And what that means is, okay, now you've recognized, you've regrouped, and now you have to channel the positive thought to move forward. And many times, this is where I've had students use a variety of techniques. Having a positive phrase like, I have studied hard for this test and I have put in all the work I could have. For others, it's a visualization, a mental image of that score, that goal score that they want. You feel stress, you think of your image or your word, you regroup, you refocus, and then that trigger that could potentially be negative is turned into a positive.
What if you do really well on the practice test, but tank on the actual test? Why does this happen?
Number 1, you know yourself best. If I were to honestly sit down with my students who haven't performed to their ability and to their potential as they feel, they're often able to vocalize some very specific possible reasons. Illness, severe stress, unexpected family issues, lack of sleep. It's normal to have a bad night of sleep the night before the test, but if you've been consistently getting 7 to 9 hours in the months preceding that, one night of bad sleep is not going to affect your test performance. But it is very important to pay attention to your lifestyle leading up to that test. Good nutrition, making sure to get your rest, having other activities besides studying so you don't burn out. That's all common sense stuff that's absolutely important and can affect your test performance. Yeah. The other common thing that I see is that the study technique just wasn't the smartest. And even though they put in hours of work, it wasn't that they were lazy or not, spending the work that they needed to. It was the type of study strategy that they used that ultimately undermined their test performance.
What is the best test prep strategy for me to achieve my goal score?
There's some key principles that you should be aware of when you're formulating your study strategy. First of all, you can crack a standardized test. It is not a mysterious black box that you must surrender to and have no control over. It's a standardized test for that reason, because there's predictability in terms of the types of questions and the types of content and the difficulty level. And so with the right preparation, you can absolutely crack this test. I think that's actually a very hopeful thing, because it doesn't matter what your entering ability is. If you do the work and you have the right amount of diligence and the right resource, you absolutely can improve your score. You can get to your goal score. Point two is you want to go with a resource that is mimicking the sort of question format and the difficulty level of the actual exam. It's very important to differentiate passive learning from active learning. Yes. Passive learning is when you're sitting there reading a textbook, trying to will it to get into your brain. We know that doesn't work for most people. Active learning is the taking of the questions, practice questions, which many question banks offer, and that is actually scientifically proven to be a better method at retaining information. Having those practice questions, when you phrase information in a question format, it actually imprints on your brain much more durably than if you were reading that same information in a textbook. So doing those practice questions is key. You want to mimic actual test conditions when you do practice questions. So if, for example, if you have a 4-hour standardized test, do 4 hours of practice questions. If you have blocks of 50 questions, do practice questions 50 questions at a time. So I really want to spend that extra time to emphasize that. To do the practice questions, do as many as you can, and do them well before the test so that you're really familiar with the concept and format.